Stargate Voyager.
Well, I am very excited to be joined in this episode by someone whose research has had a profound impact on me, and that is engineer and author Christopher Dunn. And Chris has authored several groundbreaking books that have sent really shockwaves throughout the Egyptological world, going back to the late 90s, such as the Giza Power Plant, Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt, and his latest book I got right here, Giza the Tesla Connection. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Hey, and I also want to just say thank you for your last 30 years of research. And I don't think people realize the courage it takes to do what you've done and go against the grain, go against the mainstream. And not that you were just wanting to go against it, but it's because you actually believe this, what your research has led you to. So again, I just want to thank you for having the courage to do what you've done the last 30 years.
Yes, I mean, for me, it was fairly easy because it was never my intention to go against the mainstream. In life, we are all kind of flowing along in our own particular stream, right? And so you have you have a background, you have education, experience, work experience in a particular field, and so essentially you're surrounded by your peers in that field. My field is not history or archaeology. If I was in that stream, I would definitely be swimming uphill. But with my peers in manufacturing and engineering, it's a lot easier for me because it's all about measurement and functionality. You know, what the artifacts tell us about why and how they were made.
Right. And for people that may not know, Chris, you're originally from Manchester, England, and then you immigrated to the United States after being recruited by some aerospace company, I believe. And then
Right.
If people read your bio, you've worked at every level of high-tech manufacturing, from machinist, toolmaker, programmer, operator of high-powered industrial lasers, and you've been the laser operations manager. So I wanted to start out by having you tell us a little bit about this incredible pyramid Odyssey that began for you in 1977 after you read a specific book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, but first of all, I'd like to say that there's probably a lot of other levels of manufacturing that I haven't worked at. So I don't want to disrespect anybody out there who don't recognize what they're doing in my resume. But my eyes were opened back in 1977 when I read Peter Tompkins' book, Secrets of the Great Pyramid. I mean, that's a seminal book. It's a reference work. It was groundbreaking at the time that it was published, and it asked a lot of questions. And one of the principal questions was, does the Great Pyramid enshrine a lost science from the past? And that question mark was very important to me, and was actually prominent in my mind as I continued reading the book. And then after putting it down, continuing to research and other authors' works and gather as much information about the Great Pyramid as possible.
So it was that question in the book, Peter Tompkins' book, that really was kind of like the aha moment for you?
It was, yeah. It was like a light bulb went off over my head, and one of the things that struck me was the precision of this structure. You know, is the largest structure in the world back then, the most precise structure, I think, even today, for something that covers 13 acres. And, you know, you have tolerances that were within 10,000ths of an inch on casing stones. I don't think the the requirements for modern buildings demand that kind of precision. But um, so, but the other thing that struck me was that the design of the pyramid, particularly the interior, and it, it's it's kind of like I landed on a question in my mind. If it has the precision of a machine, only on a scale of acres, and the schematics that you see on the inside have the appearance of a machine, certainly not a temple or a tomb or anything like that. Well, perhaps it could be a machine. And so, that I became actually convinced that it was a machine, and that's when I started to set out and try and figure out how it functioned.
Right. So you read this book in 1977, and then I believe you published your first paper called Advanced Machining in Ancient Egypt. You published this in 1984 before your first big book came out. 1984. I mean, what kind of blowback did you get for that paper?
Uh, there was some criticism, but we didn't have the internet back then. The blowback is much larger and more immediate today than it was back in 1984. Essentially, the article was published in Analog Magazine, 1984, the August issue. And then there was letters to the editor. And this is how you get feedback. You used to get feedback for articles published in magazines. People would write to the editor, and so there was a few letters to the editor that criticized it. But other than that, there was not that much. It wasn't until '86 when I moved to Denver that I actually started giving lectures on it. And even then, it wasn't. It was like, oh wow, that's nice, but it wasn't like I was, revolutionizing everything. It's like it was entertainment for them, and for some, it probably still is. But for me, it's serious business, because these things need explanation. You've been through Egypt many times and studied the artifacts there. So the simple methods that are described on how they were created, that you learn about in history books, really doesn't apply. And even it's counterintuitive to think that a culture that built the Great Pyramid, a culture that is supposed to have lasted 3,000 years, started off using stone balls and copper chisels and wooden hammers, and 3,000 years later they hadn't improved their tools one bit. So it's really not the way civilizations work. I mean, they're constantly improving. The article, it was fairly popular. I mean, it became it was selected as from the readers of Analog as one of the best of 1984, a fact article. And then it was selected for an anthology in 1991 as one of the best of the decade. So, that's great. Didn't pay much, but it was good. But after that, the internet sprung on the world, right? And in 1995, then I got an email from a guy who had read the original article. He was Rodney Small. I think he was from Washington, and he alerted me to the a message board where advanced machining in ancient Egypt was being discussed. And so he advised me to go check it out, and I checked it out, and then that kind of brought me down into the rabbit hole of bulletin board communications. It was a website called Deja News, the alt archaeology section of Deja News. I think it's archived somewhere. I don't go looking for it, but sure. I mean, if somebody would wanted to look for it, they'll probably find it.
Well, I'll try to link to it in the show notes of this podcast. So you're quoted as saying that the task I set myself was not to answer the question who built the Great Pyramid or when,
Right.
but why and how. I think that's very fascinating. You're not.
Well, that's basically it, Derek, and it's becoming even more important and relevant now to adhere to that and to really be thankful that I took that approach. Because I decided that I was going to stay in my lane, whatever I was talking about. I mean, when it comes to imagining what something could have been used for, like the Great Pyramid, then you stretch your imaginations and you try and figure things out. That's just a practice. That's just a practice that any engineer or technical type person will do. So, but yeah, that was my foundational philosophy was I'm not getting into who and when, just how and why. Essentially, if Egyptian history needs to be rewritten, then it's the Egyptians that should be rewriting it. And I think they're going to, because while I don't think my ideas and books have been well received in the West, as far as academics go, but they are being well received in Egypt. Not necessarily among Egyptologists, but among professional type people.
Yeah, my tour guide on my Egypt trips is Muhammad Ibrahim, who you mentioned in your book.
Oh yeah,
And so that's one of your clear disciples who's is an Egyptian, who is an Egyptologist, and one of the few who would admit that there's something else going on with the Great Pyramid here. And so it's amazing to see just the fruits of your work, just being around him and all the minds he's awakening through being influenced by you. And I know there's many others too.
right.
And I wanted to ask you, so in your first book, The Giza Power Plant, so you read that one book in 77 by that Tompkins guy. You published your first paper in 84, and then I think Giza Power Plant came out in 98. And in this book, and again, I'm going to have links for everybody to buy this in the show notes, so click there. But in your book, Giza Power Plant, Chris, you conclude that the Great Pyramid must have been originally built to provide a highly technical society with energy. In short, it was like a large machine. So now take us back. You wrote that in 98. What year did you first go inside the Great Pyramid, and what were you experiencing, and what revelations were you having?
I first went in the Great Pyramid in 1986. And of course, I'd had an article published about the Great Pyramid. I was writing a book about the Great Pyramid. And naturally, it was like, well, I really need to go there. I can't really publish a book without actually having visited Egypt. But up until 86, I wasn't able to go. And 86, the opportunity came, and I traveled to Egypt. And it was a really strange experience, because I was afraid to go inside the Great Pyramid. It was kind of like, okay, this is where the rubber meets the road, right? And when I go in there, all my ideas or all the conclusions that I'd reached, and the path that I'd taken, it could be all for naught, because here I'm going to be faced with the hard evidence. I'm not just reading about it or looking at drawings or photographs and stuff like that. So it was a different. And so I didn't go in the Great Pyramid for about 3 days. I was just like circling around. Well, the taxi driver that we had was taking us to papyrus shops and perfume shops, and how that goes, right? So we finally, I went to the Great Pyramid, and it was just unbelievable. It was an unbelievable experience, and I was more convinced at that time that I was on the right path. I didn't know what the destination would look like, but I was on a journey that I just felt that I was in alignment with it, and I was going to follow that path. So that was 1986.
That must have been just crazy for you to experience, you know, as I've experienced being in there a few times now, just the functionality of the Great Pyramid and how you state in your books is so machine-like versus, as some would say, tomb-like. So
Right.
maybe we'll get into that more, but I definitely want to jump into your new book, The Giza Tesla Connection. And I want to talk about Tesla too. An amazing book. Everybody's got to get it. Click the link in the show notes to buy it. But sharing extensive new evidence and cutting edge research. Chris shares how he believes the Great Pyramid was built as an energy harvesting machine, and
Right.
details how the ancient Egyptians were basically generating clean power for their civilization. And this takes me to so many places as we live in this supposed modern age. You know, everyone's talking about green energy, and it's
Yeah.
like this was the original green energy. So tell us about how the Great Pyramid, with your latest research, was an energy harvesting machine.
People who have read the Giza Power Plant, and if they, read the Giza the Tesla connection, they will realize that my perspective and vision of how this energy and the type of energy that was received in the Great Pyramid, how it was so much more significant than what I realized when I wrote the Giza Power Plant. And that is all because of the work of a NASA physicist called Friedemann Freund. And Friedemann Freund did a study for a few decades on the physics behind earthquake lights. And what he had noticed using NASA satellites and data from NASA satellites was that when an earthquake happened a few days before, maybe a week or 10 days before, you would get these lights, lights that would light up at the high places around where the earthquake happened. So you have a situation where the pressure is building up in the Earth's lithosphere, and and releasing electrons that flow to the surface. So he did a study um, and determined that the the physics behind it was that these peroxide defaults in the minerals in igneous rock, not just granite, because before it was always thought that whenever there was some kind of phenomenon with the earth and lights, being released, that it was piezoelectric. And he kind of disproved that with his research. And he went to his research included laboratory experiments where he had a slab of granite he brought into his lab. He had a hydraulic press, and he put it under pressure and demonstrated that electrons will flow from one end to the other. And in his writings, and he's got numerous writings that are available on the internet, and interested people could one lecture that he gave that I really enjoyed, and it was kind of I think designed more for the layperson instead of fellow physicists. But this one was this lecture happened in Christchurch, New Zealand, and it was a TEDx talk, so people can go to YouTube, just type in Friedemann Freund, that's Friedemann, Freund. I'll just put Freund in there, Freund, Christchurch, New Zealand, and watch that video. It's about 20 minutes long. It's good. It's very, very good, and it gives you a feeling of the man himself, and how important his discovery was, and he calls it like the new physics. So essentially, what he's saying is that when the Earth is put under pressure, the igneous rock minerals in the rock, these peroxide defaults will create these positive charge carriers that shoot to the surface, and then there is they join with negative electrons, and they show up as they ionize the air essentially. So that's where you get your earthquake lights. So I'm thinking, well, that's a very interesting concept. And the more I looked into it, the more convinced I became that if we could simulate that, even if forget about archaeology, history, or Egyptology, if we could simulate that and to cause the Earth, the lithosphere under our feet, to put pressure on it, or to vibrate it in some way and shake some of those electrons loose, then we would have a source for electricity that we could use, and harvesting that electricity and distributing it to the population via wireless distribution, like Nikola Tesla had proposed with his Wardenclyffe Tower. That could be a possible solution. So, it was interesting, Derek, when I got to that point, and I was writing about all this flood of ideas that came in just through, reading Friedemann's work. Actually, I went out to SETI where he worked, and I had a meeting with him. And then when I started talking about how significant his work may be to the pyramids, his eyes got real big. He's like, "What?" So, but he didn't object to it. But it was he's a wonderful guy. He's on. I think he's just 90, so he's getting up there, right? So anyway, that when you talk about a transition, or what is new about this new book that is not in the old book, that is the foundational, I think, fundamental difference. The other aspects come in, and that is there's been a lot of research since the Giza Power Plant was published, and I've written articles, and I've had stuff on my website, and but there was really a flood of information. But in 2017, 18, 19, we're talking about the Scan Pyramid project. You're talking about the research that came out of Russia, where they had shown that a pyramid with electromagnetic energy flowing through the pyramid will be focused around the king's chamber. And I was getting emails from everybody, and going, "Hey, you were right. And it's like, well, I don't know. It's too early to say." And they're saying, "Well, what do you think the large void is, the Scan Pyramid discovered?" And I was like, it's too early to say. We need to get inside there, and find out, if it contains anything, number one, what its shape is, because, as you know, it was like a point cloud that was generated with the muon plates, and so there was no the resolution was fairly poor. No measurements really. I mean, just average. It just kind of looks that way. So there's a lot of doubt as to what its shape was, what it may contain, but there doesn't seem to be any doubt there's not much doubt at all that it exists. There is a void that exists. And so I'm puzzling over this, and I have to honor a couple of research associates that were working with me, Robert Vorter, when I started to get the nudge to write an updated Giza Power Plant book. One of the weaknesses, or one of the areas that I wanted to strengthen, was the acoustics. And so I had talked to Robert Vorter when I was writing the Giza Power Plant, and that was back in '97, and talked to him much since then. So I touched base with him again, and then went out to visit him for a few days, and he's an amazing guy, very, very helpful, and he's a sound engineer, but he has a degree in archaeology, and is he's a very, very knowledgeable guy, wealth of wisdom and knowledge, input tremendously to the work, was an inspiration for it. And another man is Eric Wilson, who's a Rolls-Royce engineer. And I was with Robert, actually driving around in the Midwest, and a call comes in from Eric, and we were just talking about the void, and Eric says, "Hey, I know what that void is." And I said, well, "Okay, what is it?" And he said, "Well, I've always doubted that your theory was complete, because there was no preamp to be found in your theory, and in order for it to work, you need a preamp." And that was like, and that's your preamp, and its location is around the northern shaft, and so it, subject to further research and what might turn up, that's a good possibility. But I don't know if I'm going to be alive by the time they get in there. I'm getting on. So anyway, that was new. And other information that came to me. I mean, I revisited the whole Queen's Chamber shaft history and the research that was conducted back in 2002 and 2010. And then, some recent photographs that appeared on Ancient Architect channel of the exploration of the northern shaft that showed an area where there was the potential for, it was like a slot in the side of the wall going up the northern shaft. And if you recall, when I had proposed the purpose of those shafts, I had proposed that there was a chemical feed shaft that went to the backside of the so-called Gantenbriggs door, right? And so, but that was never found. And so when I see this opening in the side of the shaft going to the northern door, I was like, that's probably it. And so I was able to introduce that kind of concept into it. Oh, as always, everything is open to verification and validation, and also even the science and technology is open to complete study and also testing. For everything that it has to be tested. It's like a reverse engineering project, and
Right.
it is. I think I started a conversation that has lasted 30 years, and so it's kind of like it's an international brainstorming session with everybody, having a little bit of input. It's great.
Yeah, it is great. It's, 30-year conversation that sent shockwaves, that's for sure. Now, you refer in your new book, Giza, the Tesla Connection, to the builders of the Great Pyramids as planetary Earth scientists. That's a fascinating phrase, planetary Earth scientists. Now, again, you talk about how the Great Pyramids, you believe, serve to stimulate the release and collection of these electrons in the Earth's crust by
Right.
by harmonizing seismic energy. So they're tapping into the Earth's natural reservoir of gravity to get this electromagnetic energy.
Right.
So my next question, Chris, and again, everybody buy the book to get the detailed long version of this. But can you give us in the simplest way a layman's just explanation on how you believe this pyramid was producing electricity?
It was the pyramid was actually harvesting electricity. It wasn't producing it. I mean, I'm being a little particular, right? There has to it has to there has to be an initiation, right? So uh, when you talk about forcing electrons or stimulating electrons to flow in the lithosphere, then you are talking about actually a large force being driven into the earth. One of the techniques that I put in is the Tesla's earthquake machine, which is basically an oscillator that it forces or hammers a structure uh, at a particular frequency, reaching its natural frequency, and so with vibration being forced into the earth, that vibration would build, and then the electrons would flow. Um, I'm a great believer in living in harmony, and so when it comes to what we have noticed about the Great Pyramid and the resonant frequencies inside the Great Pyramid, they do seem to be in harmony with the Earth, the Earth's fundamental frequency, but also the universe, and as I write in my new book, the human DNA, which um, was the frequencies of DNA were mapped by Dr. David Deemer, and Susan Alexander, a composer, took those frequencies and stepped them down into human hearing to compose music with them. Uh, but they are the natural frequencies. The F sharp chord appears in there. So it's like everything in the universe is vibration. I mean, I think Einstein said that, right? But all is vibration. But it's when things are in harmony that you achieve peak efficiency, right? And no matter what you do, it's if it's not in harmony or if it's out of phase, then you don't have peak efficiency in any system, whether it's in acoustics and electrical or anything like that. You have to be able to be in tune with whatever you're trying to tap into.
Tesla, you've done all this extensive research on his life. I mean, he's a guy that seems to be absent from history books. I think he was born in 1856. Seems to be absent from history books, yet was responsible for, in his day, which were futuristic technologies that we still enjoy today, right?
Yeah.
His genius really shaped the world we know, pioneering the alternating current and which is the
Right.
electrical system that powers almost everything. His influence can be seen all around us, from remote control and radio to wireless communication. I
Right.
mean, you talk about some of the crazy inventions he made. I think he even had a registered patent in 1928,
Yeah.
which was depicting a flying machine that resembled an airplane and a helicopter. Right before his death, he developed, I believe, what's called the space drive, this anti-electromagnetic field propulsion system. So I guess tell me a little bit about it. It seems to me like Tesla did tap into some form that these ancient scientists possessed in ancient Egypt, correct?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because it does seem to be very popular these days. Uh, there are several videos out that are claiming that Tesla was inspired by the Great Pyramid, and that he studied the Great Pyramid and was inspired by it. And I have talked to Tesla students, people who have followed him, who read him, and they can't seem to find any record of where he even mentioned the pyramids. Now, I'm not saying that he didn't, but there doesn't seem to be any record of that he did. So that I think that where the connection comes in is that he was a genius inventor, and there are aspects to his research that he wasn't able to complete, and you have to wonder if he had been able to complete them, what the world would look like now. I mean, his one of his objectives was the free distribution of electricity. Well, I think the politics at the time wouldn't allow for that, and they probably still wouldn't allow for that. But that was his dream, was to be able to distribute electricity wirelessly uh, for anybody on the planet to use. So when it comes to his inspiration, he was quite clear about what inspired him, and he said that he believes that the universe has a central core from which all inspiration and knowledge flows out. And he noted that he hasn't been able to penetrate that core, but he knows it exists. I mean, that's a very interesting thing to say, and I think it's a very honest and humble thing to say, because basically uh, what he's telling us is that we're all receivers, right? And it's kind of like uh, unless you recognize that knowledge, ideas, novelty, invention, comes through you. It doesn't spring from you. It actually flows through you. So you have to prepare yourself to receive it, and that is kind of different to how you kind of raised in a as a religious young boy, where in order to access the higher power, you have to go through the priest or something like that. So, yeah, he was a genius for one thing, and lived a very simple life, and interesting
Yeah.
guy.
You mentioned how the politics of his day, pretty much didn't allow for his breakthrough technologies and inventions to be enjoyed by the world, free energy. That's got me thinking of the correlation with what seems to be a cover up of history when we talk about Egypt, especially in the pyramids. And we don't have time to get into the mainstream narrative that's been pushed forever, is the tomb theory, that the pyramids are simply tombs, and
Yeah, yeah,
they've got the whole Egyptological community there to convince you of that. And
right,
so talk to me about the correlation. Here you've got Tesla, who's, part of the title of your book, The Tesla Giza Connection.
right,
Tesla was highly censored. The politics would not allow him
right,
to run with these ideas that could have really helped the world. I mean, if we had let Tesla do what he did, the world could have been wired before we put up wires everywhere, right? Wireless
right,
technology. And
right,
now today, we've got pioneers like you with your books, providing evidence, just evidence of what you think the pyramid was really for. It was an ancient energy generator. Yet the politics of the day will not allow the mainstream to admit that again, with the answers that you uncover in this book, it seems to me part of the reason for that is this would be, if we really knew that this pyramid was an ancient energy generator, we would be asking, well, let's get this technology back today, right?
Oh, that's it. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. And that's where I landed right as I was finishing up the book. It was kind of like I'm more interested now in what happens in the future than what has happened in the past. I mean, I respect what's happened in the past, but that's in the past. We learn from it. But what's going to happen in the future, and how can we improve our future? And when you look at the development and progress of invention, over 100 years, who knows what we're going to see in another 100 years now? So, it's and then including Tesla on the cover, it was. I wanted to honor his inspiration, how he inspired me, and it's kind of like you're picking out all these ideas from different sources. Tesla is being inspired. He's connected, and people like Eric Wilson and Bob Vorter, they're inspired. Freedom Freud, they're all switched on, and they all have these great ideas, and it's like, yeah, I could give them a platform in this book because they answer all the questions I had, and I just feel so fortunate to have been privileged enough to know them. Unfortunately, my good friend Bob Vorter, he passed away last year, so. But he certainly contributed quite a lot.
One of Tesla's famous quotes is he said, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Again, that's really what your books are all about. You look at the vibration and frequency rates found at ancient sites and show how the pyramids were tuned to the Earth's frequency. One of the questions I have for you, Chris, I don't know if a lot of people ask you this question. Obviously, the pyramid, was all about acoustical science and resonance. But do you think these ancient engineers also used that resonance and frequency to even lift these blocks and these stones with ease?
I'm convinced of it. Yeah, I mean, they definitely had a technique for, I don't know, being able to control the effects of gravity on material things. And to say that can't be done, or to, be saying, oh, you can't control gravity. Well, all you got to do is look at these UAPs that are flitting around in our atmosphere, in total control of gravity. Gravity has no effect on them. When you can drop down from 80,000 feet to sea level in just a few seconds, or shoot off at 1,000 miles an hour and turn 90 degrees without stopping. We can't do that. Our technology isn't capable of that. So it's out there. It's been done. I definitely think that all these sites around the world where you see these cyclopean blocks of stone, these monoliths, right? Ancient megaliths, right? All around the world, 1,000 tons, 1,200 tons. How were they lifting them?
It's just mind-boggling. Again, when you get to Egypt and you see the scale of the land, and you realize that, like, inside the so-called king's chamber, the holiest of holies inside this, the world's greatest wonder, that the rose granite inside there, it's not like they just took it, a few minutes from the Great Pyramid and brought it in. It was taken over 500 miles away, which is like a 8+ hour car drive from the Luxor area or Aswan, just again transporting 70-ton plus
Yeah.
blocks.
Yeah.
That again it goes to the acoustic levitation resonance thoughts in my mind. But then let's talk about when you're inside the king's chamber. You can see how the roof, these massive granite beams, have been separated, and later, whether it was the dynastic Egyptians or even in the 1800s, they've tried to cement and patch this up. The point is, there was an explosion in there. And then you detail in your books how when the fire rushed out of this chamber, it went into that grand gallery that leads into the king's chamber, and it burned up what you believe were resonators in the slots that go down all the way down the grand gallery. And if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, you're going to see pictures now of the grand gallery and the slots on the bottom sides. So Chris, talk to us about this, what you believe was an explosion at one time in the king's chamber that went into the grand gallery, and talk to us about mostly the components that you believe were the actual tools that were making this thing function.
The process that was going on inside the Great Pyramid was that in the Queen's chamber, that was a reaction chamber, and they were generating hydrogen. The hydrogen filled the interior chambers and passageways and made its way up to the King's chamber. It was a part of a maser, what they call a maser microwave amplification through stimulated emission radiation. The evidence for that is in the King's chamber. The northern shaft is a waveguide coming from the north, and then there is a microwave horn antenna in the south wall of the King's chamber, where a beam of microwaves would come in, stimulate emission in the energized gas inside the chamber, exit through the south, and then go to the south. Be collected on the outside in some manner, or projected into, to a geosynchronous satellite, and be transmitted elsewhere. I don't know, but it does seem, the evidence suggests, as I detail in the Giza Power Plant and also the Tesla connection, that hydrogen was a function of this power plant. It functioned for quite a while. I mean, the evidence is that I don't know how many years. It was maintenance free for the most part, because there's nothing to do to maintain it on the inside. On occasion, they would have to change out a couple of electrodes at the end of the southern shaft. But then everything stopped when there was a cataclysm. You have an energy system that's based on frequency vibration. It's actually drawing energy from a sphere, and there is a known quantity of vibration that is going to come through the pyramid. And if you increase that vibration to a higher level, then whatever is connected to it as like a coupled oscillator or something like that, would have to transmit, or to dampen that, or pass it through in some way. So if you have a comet strike in a part of the globe, you're introducing more energy into the Earth than the Great Pyramid is equipped to handle. What happens then? It shakes apart. And so you have you've been to Egypt many times, you've been to Abu Rawash, you've been to Abu Ghurab, you go to Luxor, you see devastation everywhere. You see where, a lot of elements or members of buildings are broken, cracked through, obelisks fallen. There's a lot of destruction that went on, and basically what we're looking at is just the skeleton of this civilization. So essentially, what what would happen then if you had this power plant that was essentially working very nicely with hydrogen? It's in everything's controlled. There's nothing to set the hydrogen on fire or anything like that. And then, the outer blocks shake off. Whatever is covering the southern shaft, the northern shaft of the King's Chamber, the optics there, they would shake off. Oxygen would enter into the chamber, and then, they're just a little spark. It would everything would explode. So the evidence in the Grand Gallery, I proposed in the Giza Power Plant, and I am proposing in the Giza Tesla connection, was that those slots contained a series of stacks of resonators, and these resonators were used to gather vibration that was coming through the Great Pyramid and convert that vibration into airborne sound, thereby being able to increase the sound in the King's Chamber, because everything is projected towards the King's Chamber. And the evidence that of the existence of those are the scorch marks on the ceiling of the Grand Gallery, which I noted in 2001, much to my surprise, and I didn't even think about it. But if there had been an explosion in the King's Chamber, then what happened to the resonators that were in the Grand Gallery? And I looked up at the ceiling after the interior had been cleaned, and noted scorch marks, just the same pattern that you would expect, right above the slots, one on both sides of the ceiling. So that was remarkable. But the other evidence, and I'm sure you're aware of it, it was written, it was discussed by Petrie in his book, and that is the expansion of the King's Chamber, and and so you have a chamber that had been pushed out. The walls have been pushed out. The ceiling beams have probably lifted off, the walls, and then crashed back down and cracked. So that's pretty much the equipment. Now, what the resonators, how they function, I had Helmholtz resonators assigned to that function. It could have been an open resonator. It could have been something different, like a tuning fork arrangement, or something is actually vibrating in tune, or in harmony with the vibrations coming through the earth and emitting sound. That sound is going into the King's Chamber.
Well, this has been a fascinating interview, Chris. Thank you so much for your time. And I want to close with a quote from your book, again, that I think is more relevant now than ever in this day we're living in. You say, quote, "While the pyramid's sophisticated energy harvesting abilities are now in disarray and disuse, some remnants of their technologies are still there, waiting to be rediscovered and provide our civilization with an abundance of non-polluting power." Wow, that's fascinating. And again, I think, to me personally, my humble opinion, that's a reason for all of the opposition to these theories, is the powers that be don't want free energy for the world, which I believe the ancients had. And it's crazy. Mainstream tells us the further we look back into the history, the more archaic it was. But when you actually look at the evidence that you provide in your books, they had technologies we could only dream of. So
Right. I kind of think now that, if you're going to build 1 million electric cars, or 10 million electric cars, and build a power plant to power them, it's like we have an objective to put everybody in an electric car, but where is the support, the infrastructure to deliver electricity to them? So, and I think, that effort or idea could go in the ears of a electric car manufacturer or a member of government if they have the political will to do that. Then I think that would be a very positive thing. Like I said, I don't care about overturning history or anything like that. I think right in the future is more important.
Well said. Well, Chris, again, thank you for your time. I would encourage everybody watching or listening to go to gizapower.com. That's Chris's website, where you can kind of keep up to date with him. You can click the link in the show notes below to get, again, his new book, Giza, the Tesla Connection, and his other books, the Giza Power Plant. Well, Chris, thanks again for your time, and I'm really enjoying your book. Thanks for being a pioneer and for having the courage to put out another book.
Well, hey, thank you very much for picking up the mantle and running with it. We need more people like you. It's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.